There is a walnut sitting in your kitchen right now that can erase a scratch from any piece of wood furniture in your house. Not hide it, not paint over it, not fill it with colored wax that chips off in a week. Erase it. You crack the walnut, rub the meat across the scratch, wait 2 minutes, and the scratch vanishes in front of your eyes. The natural oils soak into the exposed wood fibers, darken them back to their original tone, and seal the damage from within. No sanding, no stain matching, no professional. This is not a hack someone invented on the internet. This is chemistry that has existed for centuries. Chemistry so effective that Leonardo da Vinci used walnut oil as the binding medium for the Salvator Mundi, the most expensive painting ever sold at auction. $450 million, painted on a walnut wood panel with walnut oil. The same oil inside the nut sitting in your pantry preserved a 500-year-old masterpiece. And yet, a $2.1 billion furniture repair industry would rather you never learn this, because a walnut costs pennies, and a professional scratch repair starts at $50. This is the story of the cheapest wood restoration secret on Earth, and why an entire industry replaced it with $40 products that fail in months. The walnut tree is not just a source of food, it is one of the most chemically extraordinary trees on the planet. Inside every walnut hull is a compound called juglone. Juglone is so potent that it kills competing plants. If you plant tomatoes or peppers within the root zone of a black walnut tree, they will wilt and die. The tree exudes this chemical from its roots, its leaves, and its fallen nuts. The ground beneath a walnut tree becomes a chemical exclusion zone. Nothing it considers a competitor survives. But juglone is also one of the most powerful natural dyes ever discovered. Native American tribes, including the Cherokee and Chippewa, used walnut hull dye for clothing and medicine for centuries. During the Civil War, Confederate soldiers wore uniforms dyed brown with black walnut hulls because the South had no access to commercial dye factories. During both World Wars, the United States government classified walnut wood as a strategic military material used for airplane propellers, gun stocks, and ship components. The government knew what this tree could do. The dye from its hulls is so permanent that stains from fallen walnuts on a sidewalk will survive an entire winter of rain. That same permanence is what makes a walnut so effective on scratched wood. The juglone does not wash out, it bonds. Here is what happens at the molecular level. A walnut kernel contains roughly 60% oil by weight. That oil is 72% polyunsaturated fatty acids, primarily linoleic acid at 58% and alpha-linolenic acid at 14%. Both are classified as drying oils. When they contact oxygen, they do not evaporate. They polymerize, and they harden into a flexible, transparent film that bonds to whatever surface absorbed them. This is the exact same chemistry behind linseed oil, the most important wood finish in human history. But walnut oil has one critical advantage. It does not yellow over time. Leonardo chose walnut oil over linseed oil because it dried clear and preserved the true colors of his pigments for centuries. His Lady with the Ermine and La Belle Ferronnière were both painted on walnut panels. He understood the chemistry better than anyone alive in his era. When you rub a walnut across a scratch, the pressure and friction warm the nut, releasing its oil directly into the damaged fibers. A scratch on wood is not missing material. It is a disruption where fibers have dried out and lost their color. The walnut oil floods back into those dehydrated fibers, rehydrates them, darkens them to match the surrounding wood, and the juglone adds a warm brown tint that blends with the grain naturally. And because walnut oil is a drying oil, it does not stay wet or wash off. It polymerizes inside the fibers over the next few hours, forming a permanent bond. The scratch is chemically sealed into the wood from within. Now here is where you need to understand what the industry replaced this with and why. Walk into any hardware store and go to the scratch repair aisle. A wood touch-up marker costs $8 to $12. The raw material inside that marker, pigmented wax and a drying oil solvent, costs less than 30 cents to manufacture. A bottle of branded wood scratch concealer costs $15 to $25. The active chemistry inside is the same oil-based compound that has existed since the 18th century. But the real problem is not the markup. The real problem is how these products work compared to a walnut. Polyurethane finishes and synthetic scratch fillers sit on top of the wood grain like a plastic shell. They do not penetrate. They do not bond at the molecular level. They cover the scratch the way a bandage covers a cut. And one crack in that shell lets moisture rush underneath. That is why polyurethane decks peel, blister, and turn gray within 3 seasons. That is why wax-filled scratch pens look perfect for 2 weeks and then collect dirt in the edges and chip away. Walnut oil does the opposite. It soaks inside the wood and becomes part of the wood itself. You are not covering the scratch. You are healing it. One method requires repurchasing. The other requires a trip to your kitchen. So why does every hardware store in America push the synthetic version and not the natural one? Because in the 1950s, the petrochemical industry introduced synthetic alkyd resins and polyurethane coatings. Companies like DuPont, Sherwin-Williams, and PPG Industries flooded the market with products that were faster to apply, shinier to look at, and far more profitable to manufacture. Natural oils like walnut oil and linseed oil cost pennies per application. Synthetic finishes cost dollars. And here is the devastating detail. The synthetic products needed reapplication every 2 to 3 years. The natural oils lasted a decade or more. The industry did not switch because the new products were better. They switched because the new products failed faster, and failure generates repeat purchases. Linseed oil and walnut oil quietly disappeared from hardware store shelves, not because they stopped working, but because they worked too well and cost too little. Now do the math on what this costs you personally. The average cost to refinish a single piece of furniture is $500. A dining table runs $400 to $1,200 at a professional shop. Deck refinishing alone costs homeowners $900 to $2,700 per project, and the industry recommends you refinish every 2 to 3 years. That is $1,000 every 3 years for a single deck. Over 20 years of homeownership, that is nearly $7,000 spent on one wooden platform behind your house. Now multiply that across the 75 million single-family homes in America that have wooden decks, fences, porches, furniture, floors, cabinets, and trim. The furniture repair market alone was valued at $2.1 billion in 2024. The broader wood restoration market dwarfs that figure entirely. And it all depends on one thing, keeping you convinced that you cannot do this yourself. You cannot patent a walnut. You cannot patent walnut oil. You cannot patent linseed oil. And what cannot be patented cannot generate licensing fees. What cannot be licensed cannot create exclusive distribution. What cannot be distributed exclusively cannot build a brand monopoly. The entire business model depends on you believing that wood care requires specialized, branded, expensive products with names you recognize from television commercials. And for bigger jobs than scratch repair, there is a formula your great-grandparents knew by heart. In 1860, a British inventor named Frederick Walton noticed a rubbery skin forming on linseed oil he left open overnight in his London workshop. The oil had reacted with oxygen and formed a natural polymer, harder than varnish and more flexible than lacquer. Walton spent 3 years perfecting the process, and by 1863 he invented linoleum, the first mass-produced floor covering in history, built entirely on one ingredient. Linseed oil is pressed from the seeds of the flax plant, but this oil goes back much further than Victorian England. The flax plant is one of the oldest cultivated crops on Earth, grown in ancient Mesopotamia for both fiber and seed. Egyptian tombs contain linen woven from flax that is still intact after 4,000 years. Ancient Chinese woodworkers discovered that pressing those seeds produced a golden oil that soaked into timber and hardened over weeks into a protective shield. This was the first wood finish ever recorded in human history. Not polyurethane from a factory, not chemical sealant from a laboratory. Oil from a seed pressed by hand, rubbed into wood with a cloth. For centuries across Europe, every cabinet maker, shipbuilder, and furniture maker used linseed oil as the foundation of their craft. Medieval builders mixed it with metallic drying agents to create boiled linseed oil, which dried harder and faster. Cathedral doors in Germany treated with this oil in the 1500s are still standing today. British naval vessels coated their decks with linseed oil before crossing the Atlantic, and the wood survived salt water, tropical sun, and cannon fire. Combine equal parts boiled linseed oil, white vinegar, and turpentine, and you have a restoration formula that cabinet makers passed down like a family secret since before the Second World War. Vinegar is acetic acid, a natural solvent that cuts through decades of grime and oxidation without damaging healthy fibers underneath. The turpentine, distilled from pine resin, thins the oil so it penetrates twice as deep and cures twice as fast. The linseed oil polymerizes inside the wood fibers and hardens into a permanent protective barrier. A quart of boiled linseed oil costs about $4. A gallon of white vinegar costs under $3. A small can of turpentine runs about $5 and lasts for months. Total cost under $2 per application. A contractor quotes from $900 to $2,700 for the same result on your deck. But here is the honest part. The walnut trick works beautifully on light surface scratches where the finish is disrupted, but the wood is not physically missing. For those, it is genuinely remarkable, and it outperforms commercial pens because the oil bonds naturally. It will not fix deep gouges where material is gone. It will not work on painted surfaces or thick polyurethane coatings because the oil cannot penetrate plastic to reach the wood. On very light woods like maple or birch, walnut pigment may darken the repair more than the surrounding area, so test on a hidden spot first. For lighter woods, try pecan or hickory instead. For the linseed oil formula, use boiled linseed oil, not raw, because raw takes weeks to cure. And one critical safety warning. Rags soaked with linseed oil can spontaneously combust if crumpled in a pile. In 1991, linseed oil rags destroyed one Meridian Plaza in Philadelphia and killed 3 firefighters. Spread used rags flat to dry outdoors or submerge them in water in a sealed metal container. This is a life safety rule. Here is how to do it. For scratches on furniture, crack a walnut in half and rub the exposed meat firmly along the scratch, always following the direction of the grain. Press hard enough to warm the nut with friction, which releases more oil from the meat. You will see it crumble slightly. That is normal. Keep rubbing for about 30 seconds. Then wait 2 to 3 minutes and let the oil soak into the wood. Buff gently with a soft cloth. The scratch will be dramatically reduced or completely invisible. For deeper marks, repeat the process 2 to 3 times, letting the oil absorb between each pass. Each application darkens the exposed fibers a little more until they match the surrounding wood. For larger surfaces like tables, desks, and dressers, use pure walnut oil on a cotton cloth. Work it into the grain in small circular motions. Let it absorb for 15 minutes, then wipe away the excess. The surface will develop a warm satin sheen that deepens the grain without looking plastic. For decks, fences, and outdoor furniture, mix equal parts boiled linseed oil, white vinegar, and turpentine in a glass jar with a tight lid. Shake vigorously for 30 seconds until it turns cloudy gold. Apply along the grain with a rag or brush in 2-foot sections. Let the first coat absorb 10 to 15 minutes, then wipe the excess. Wait 24 hours. Apply a second coat the same way. The gray oxidized layer dissolves on contact with the vinegar, and the golden oil floods into the freshly exposed grain within seconds. The before and after on a single board will convince you faster than anything I can say. Total cost under $5 for a full deck. A floor refinishing company would charge $3 to $7 per square foot, turning a 200 square foot room into a $1,400 invoice. You just did it for less than the cost of a cup of coffee. The oil that preserved a $450 million painting for 5 centuries can handle your dining table. The formula that protected cathedral doors in the 1500s can protect your fence. The chemistry that kept British warships watertight crossing the Atlantic can save your deck this weekend. Your grandparents knew this. Every farmhouse workshop had linseed oil and walnuts on the shelf. Cabinet makers wrote these formulas on index cards tucked inside kitchen drawers. Then, one generation stopped passing it down because a television commercial told them there was a better product. There was not a better product. There was a more expensive product that fails faster and must be repurchased every 2 to 3 years. And the difference between those two things is the entire foundation of a multi-billion-dollar industry that DuPont, Sherwin-Williams, and PPG Industries built by making sure you would never open a chemistry textbook. That gray deck you have been avoiding all summer could look brand new by this weekend. That antique table you inherited from your grandmother that looks tired and scratched could shine again like it did the day she bought it. All for less than $1 and 20 minutes of your time. If this video opened a vault for you, subscribe and share it forward. Every share preserves what the industry tried to bury. Every person who learns this is one less recurring customer. The wood did not die. The knowledge did not fail. They just made sure you would forget. And now you remember.